Tornadoes destroy buildings and kill people, but they don't make entire towns vanish without leaving debris. Yet that's exactly what emergency responders found when they reached Jarrel's coordinates: pristine empty land, where 1,400 people had been living just hours before. How do you erase every trace of human existence? I never thought I'd be telling you about the day my town disappeared from the face of the earth, but here we are. You probably haven't heard of Jarrel, Texas, and honestly, that makes perfect sense. Before May 27th, 1997, most people hadn't heard of us either. We were just this tiny dot on the map about 40 miles north of Austin, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, and the biggest excitement was usually someone's cow getting loose on Main Street. The thing about small towns is they trick you into feeling safe. Well, maybe trick isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. When you've lived somewhere your whole life and the most dangerous thing that happens is old Mrs. Henderson's aggressive chihuahua chasing kids on bikes, you start believing nothing really bad can touch you. Jarrel had maybe 450 people on a good day when everyone was home from work. The post office doubled as a community bulletin board. Our grocery store was so small you could stand in the cereal aisle and still reach the milk. But here's what made 1997 different from all the years before. We had this new neighborhood called Double Creek Estates. Sounds fancy, right? It wasn't exactly Beverly Hills, but for Jarrel standards, it was pretty upscale. These weren't the old farmhouses and trailers scattered around town that most of us called home. These were real suburban houses with actual lawns and driveways that didn't have potholes. The kind of place where young families moved when they wanted small-town life, but with modern conveniences. Double Creek Estates sat on what used to be farmland just southwest of the main part of town. The developers had cleared out the old oak trees and mesquite, laid down streets with names like Meadowlark Drive and Peaceful Valley Lane. Looking back now, those street names feel like some kind of cruel joke the universe was playing on us, but nobody was laughing about what happened next. The weird part is, tornadoes weren't really our thing in Jarrel. Sure, we'd get the occasional severe thunderstorm, and every spring we'd hear the sirens test on the first Wednesday of the month like clockwork. Most of us treated tornado warnings the same way people treat fire alarms in office buildings, annoying interruptions that usually turn out to be nothing. Central Texas gets plenty of storms, but the really nasty ones usually stayed further east or west of us. Makes sense, right? We'd been lucky for decades. Our grandparents had stories about bad storms, but nothing that wiped entire neighborhoods off the map. The old-timers would talk about hail the size of golf balls or winds that knocked over a few trees, but catastrophic destruction that happened to other places. Other towns, other people who lived in trailer parks in Oklahoma or flat farmland in Kansas. Then there's the psychology of living in Tornado Alley without really believing you're in Tornado Alley. You hear about more Oklahoma getting hit or some town in Texas you've never heard of getting flattened, and you feel bad for those people. You might even donate some clothes to the Red Cross, but deep down, you think there's something different about your town, something that makes you special. Protected, Double Creek Estates had become home to some of the nicest families in our area. The Igos, the Moerings, the Ruiz family, people who'd saved up to buy their first real houses, who were living what felt like the American dream in our little corner of Texas. Kids rode bikes in circles around the cul-de-sacs. Parents grilled burgers in their backyards and waved to neighbors over chain-link fences. But why am I telling you all this background stuff about a town you've probably never heard of and people whose names don't mean anything to you? Because understanding what Jarrel was like before that Tuesday in May makes what happened next feel even more impossible. We weren't prepared for what was coming. How could we be? The National Weather Service had been tracking storm patterns for years, and our area just wasn't high on anyone's danger list. We had warning systems, sure, but they were designed for the kind of storms we usually got, not for what meteorologists would later call one of the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded. Looking back, I wonder if our sense of safety made everything worse. When you've never seen real destruction, when the worst storm in your memory just knocked out power for a few hours, how do you process warnings about something that could erase your entire neighborhood? Well, we were about to find out the hard way that Mother Nature doesn't care about your town's track record or how safe you've always felt. I remember waking up that morning feeling like someone had wrapped a wet blanket around the entire state of Texas, May 27th, 1997, a Tuesday that started off innocent enough, but had this weird heavy feeling hanging in the air that made your shirt stick to your back before you even stepped outside. The kind of humidity that makes you wonder if you're breathing water instead of air. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was already out watering her petunias at 7 in the morning, which should have been my first clue something was off. Nobody waters flowers when it feels like you're living inside a steam room, but there she was, acting like it was just another beautiful spring day in Jarrel. Makes sense, right? We Texans are stubborn like that. We'll pretend everything's normal, even when Mother Nature is clearly having some kind of mood swing. The thing about tornado watches is they're like that friend who cries wolf too often. By early afternoon, the meteorologists were already throwing around their usual warnings, but honestly, we'd heard it all before. Every spring brought the same song and dance: severe thunderstorm potential, possible rotation, stay tuned for updates. Most of us had learned to tune it out because, well, nothing ever really happened in our little corner of the world. I was working at the grocery store then, and I'll never forget how normal everything felt despite the weather reports crackling over the radio every 15 minutes. People were buying their usual Tuesday stuff: milk, bread, ground beef for dinner. Mrs. Chen came in for her weekly supply of Diet Coke and complained about the heat like she did every summer. Old Mr. Rodriguez picked up his prescription and joked about his arthritis acting up because of the pressure change. Nobody seemed particularly worried about those tornado watches everyone kept mentioning. But here's the weird part. The kids felt it. School let out at the regular time, around 3:15, and I watched through the store windows as they walked home. Usually those kids would be running around, playing, making noise like kids do. Not that day. They walked quietly, almost like they sensed something we adults were too stubborn to acknowledge. Animals know when earthquakes are coming, so maybe kids have some kind of built-in weather radar too. Then there's the communication problem nobody wants to talk about. This was 1997, remember? No smartphones buzzing with emergency alerts every 5 seconds. No Twitter feeds updating us on storm conditions. We had the local radio station, maybe the evening news if we were home in time, and those outdoor warning sirens that worked when they felt like it. Half the people in Double Creek Estates probably never even heard about the tornado watch until it was way too late to matter. My buddy Jake was supposed to come over that afternoon to help me fix my fence, the same fence that wouldn't exist in a few hours, though neither of us knew that yet. He called around 2:30 to say he was running late because his wife was nervous about the weather and wanted him to stay close to home. I gave him grief about it, told him his wife was being paranoid, and that we'd had worse-looking storms that turned into nothing but a little rain and some thunder. Well, turns out his wife wasn't paranoid at all. She was smart. The strangest thing about that whole afternoon was how life just kept happening like normal while disaster was literally brewing a few miles away. People were mowing their lawns despite the oppressive heat. Kids were playing in backyards. Families were sitting down to early dinners, probably complaining about the humidity and wondering when this heat wave would finally break. Some folks were even planning barbecues for the upcoming Memorial Day weekend, completely oblivious to what was building up in the atmosphere above their heads. I closed the store at 3:30 and drove home through air so thick it felt like swimming. The radio was still chattering about severe weather possibilities, rotating supercells, and all that meteorological jargon that sounds scary but somehow doesn't feel real when you're just trying to get home and maybe catch a cold beer before dinner. The sky looked threatening, sure, but Texas skies always look threatening in late spring. We're used to it. Looking back now, I realize how many little warning signs we all missed or ignored that day. The way the air felt electric, like right before lightning strikes, how quiet the birds were. The strange greenish tint to the western horizon that wasn't quite like anything I'd seen before, but wasn't dramatic enough to make me pull over and really pay attention. None of us knew that while we were going about our normal Tuesday routines, something absolutely monstrous was already beginning to take shape in the sky just west of town. I was working at the National Weather Service office in Austin that day, and honestly, the morning felt like any other hot Texas Tuesday. Sure, it was humid as hell, the kind of weather that makes your shirt stick to your back before you even finish your coffee, but you know what they say about Texas weather: if you don't like it, wait 5 minutes. Nobody was expecting what came next. Around noon, I started seeing something weird on the radar. Not weird like, oh, that's interesting weird, but weird like, this shouldn't be happening weird. The atmosphere was getting restless, and I could feel it in my bones. Call it meteorologist intuition or just plain dread, but something was off. The temperature had been climbing all morning, hitting the mid-90s by lunch. That's not unusual for late May in central Texas, but the humidity was suffocating. It felt like breathing through a wet towel. The air was so thick you could practically chew it, and then there was this stillness, the kind that makes dogs hide under porches and birds stop singing. Well, that stillness didn't last long. By 1:30 in the afternoon, towering cumulus clouds started popping up like mushrooms after rain. These weren't your friendly, puffy white clouds either. They were dark, angry-looking things that seemed to grow taller by the minute. I watched them on satellite imagery, climbing 40,000 feet, then 50,000 feet. Some reached nearly 60,000 feet high. That's twice the height commercial planes fly. The weird part is how fast everything changed. One minute I'm looking at scattered clouds, the next minute there's this monster supercell developing just west of Jarrel. The rotation signatures were showing up clear as day on our Doppler radar. But here's what made my stomach drop. This wasn't behaving like a normal tornado-producing storm. Most tornadoes in Texas move northeast at about 30 to 40 miles per hour. They're dangerous, sure, but you can usually track where they're headed and give people decent warning. This storm was barely moving. It was crawling along at maybe 5 miles per hour, sometimes even slower. That might sound less threatening, but trust me, it's the opposite. A slow-moving tornado is like a slow-moving buzzsaw. It has all the time in the world to destroy everything in its path. Then there's the matter of wind shear. Without getting too technical, wind shear is what makes tornadoes spin. That day, the wind shear was textbook perfect for tornado development. Winds at different altitudes were moving at different speeds and directions, creating this invisible spinning motion in the atmosphere. It was like nature had set up a tornado factory right over central Texas. By 2 p.m. I was getting nervous. The storm was organizing itself with frightening efficiency. The updraft was so strong it was punching through the tropopause. That's the ceiling of our weather, basically. This thing was a meteorological freak show, and it was heading straight for Jarrel. Makes sense that people in town weren't panicking yet, right? Most folks were going about their day, maybe noticing the sky getting darker, but not thinking much of it. Afternoon thunderstorms are normal in Texas. What they couldn't see was what I was seeing on radar, a tight, violent rotation signature getting stronger by the minute. The National Weather Service issued a tornado watch at 12:50 p.m., but watches are pretty routine. They basically mean conditions are right for tornadoes to develop. People hear watch and think, maybe keep an eye on the sky. What we really needed was a warning, but we couldn't issue one until we had confirmation of an actual tornado. And the really messed up part, the storm was moving so slowly that our standard warning protocols weren't quite designed for this scenario. We're used to storms that race across the landscape, giving us clear forward motion to track. This beast was practically stationary, just sitting there and spinning up like a top. By 3 p.m., the sky over Jarrel had turned that ominous green color that tornado veterans know all too well. It's caused by light filtering through massive amounts of water and ice in the storm clouds. Some people say it looks beautiful. Those people have never seen what comes next. The emergency sirens in town were tested every Wednesday at noon, so residents knew what they sounded like. But on this Tuesday afternoon, when those sirens started wailing for real, many people had only minutes to take cover. Minutes to make decisions that would determine whether they lived or died. But even I, watching this monster develop on radar, couldn't have predicted what was about to unfold. What happened next would rewrite the textbook on tornado destruction and change how we think about these storms forever. I was 16 that day, home alone because my parents had driven to Austin for some boring doctor's appointment. Mom had made me promise to keep an eye on the weather, like I was some meteorologist or something. The whole morning felt wrong though, you know? That sticky, heavy air that makes your shirt cling to your back even when you're just sitting around doing nothing. By 3 p.m., I was sprawled on our living room couch, flipping through channels and complaining about the heat. That's when the first real warning came through on the radio. Tornado watch for Williamson County. Big deal, right? We got those all the time. Texas weather loves to throw tantrums, but nothing ever really happened in Jarrel. We weren't Moore, Oklahoma, or some tornado magnet in Kansas, but then I looked outside. The sky had turned this sick green color, not the pretty green you see in spring grass, but something darker, meaner, like the world had developed some kind of infection. I'd never seen anything like it, and honestly, it scared the hell out of me. The wind started picking up too, rattling our screen door in a way that made my teeth itch, at exactly 3:40 p.m. I remember because I was watching the clock, hoping my parents would get home soon, everything changed. The tornado sirens started wailing, but they sounded different than usual. More urgent, more desperate. Like they knew what was coming and were screaming their mechanical hearts out trying to warn us. I ran to our back window and saw it. Jesus Christ, I saw it. This massive dark wall was moving across the horizon, maybe 2 miles away. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It looked like someone had taken a giant eraser and was slowly rubbing out the landscape. Houses, trees, everything just disappeared as this thing moved forward. The tornado was huge, nearly half a mile wide, which I didn't know at the time, but I could tell it was wrong. Tornadoes in movies look like skinny funnels, right? This thing was a monster, a fat, angry beast that seemed to take up the entire sky. And it was headed straight for Double Creek Estates, where my friend Sarah lived with her little brother and parents. I tried calling Sarah, but the phone lines were already going crazy. Busy signals, dead air, that awful screeching sound phones make when everything's falling apart. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the numbers anyway. The sound hit us next, not just wind. This was like standing next to a freight train while someone fed it through a blender. A roar so deep and violent that I felt it in my bones. Our windows started vibrating, and I swear I could feel the house shaking even though the tornado was still a mile away. Then I realized something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't moving like tornadoes are supposed to move. Most twisters race across the landscape at 30 or 40 miles per hour, tearing things up quickly and moving on. This thing was crawling, barely 15 miles per hour, taking its sweet time, savoring every second of destruction. It was like watching a serial killer who wasn't in any hurry. I grabbed our portable radio and ran to the closet under our stairs, the safest spot in the house, according to my dad. The meteorologists on the radio were losing their minds. "This is an extremely dangerous tornado," they kept saying. 5.5 intensity. Winds up to 260 miles per hour, 260 miles per hour. Do you have any idea how fast that is? A Category 5 hurricane has winds around 160. This thing was off the charts. From my hiding spot, I could hear our house groaning. The tornado was still over a mile away, but the outer winds were already trying to peel our roof off. I kept thinking about Sarah and her family, about all those new houses in Double Creek Estates that people had saved up for years to buy. Beautiful homes with perfect lawns and swing sets in the backyards. The radio announcer's voice cracked as he tried to describe what he was seeing on radar. "The tornado it's scouring the ground. We've never seen anything like this. If you're in the Double Creek area, you need to take cover immediately." But I knew it was too late for warnings. When you're facing winds that can turn a house into toothpicks in seconds, there's nowhere to hide. The monster had arrived, and it was hungry. What happened next would haunt Jarrel forever and leave questions that still make meteorologists scratch their heads today. I keep staring at the aerial photos from that day, and honestly, they look fake, like someone took a perfectly normal neighborhood and hit the delete key. But this was real, and I lived through watching my town get erased in less than 15 minutes. When that F5 tornado finally moved on, what it left behind wasn't destruction, it was nothing. And I mean literally nothing. Where Double Creek Estates used to be, where my neighbors, the Smiths, had their blue house with the white picket fence, where kids rode bikes just that morning, gone. Not damaged, not destroyed, gone. 38 homes just vanished like they never existed in the first place. The concrete slabs were still there, sure, but they looked like graves. Clean rectangles of foundation sitting in what used to be a neighborhood, now looking more like an alien landing site. Makes sense, right? Because what happened here wasn't normal. Normal tornadoes knock down houses, tear off roofs, maybe flip some cars. This thing didn't knock anything down. It deleted everything. I remember walking through there the next day with the search teams, trying to help them understand where houses used to be. The red brick house was right here, I'd say, pointing at nothing but dirt. The rescue workers would look at me like I was crazy. Well, there was no red brick, there was no house, there wasn't even red dust that might have been brick once upon a time. Cars got tossed around like toys, but even that description doesn't do it justice. A toy thrown by an angry kid is still recognizable as a toy. These cars, twisted metal scattered hundreds of yards away, some wrapped around what few trees managed to stay rooted. The weird part is how far some of them traveled. We found parts of vehicles almost half a mile from where they started. Then there were the trees, or what used to be trees. Every single one in the tornado's path got stripped completely bare. Not just leaves, bark, branches, everything. They stood there like giant toothpicks stuck in the ground, white and naked against the brown dirt. Some meteorologist later told me the winds were so strong they acted like sandblasters, literally scouring the bark right off. But standing there looking at those ghostly tree skeletons, all I could think was how wrong this looked, how unnatural. But here's what really messed with everyone's heads. The ground itself got eaten. The tornado didn't just take everything on top of the earth. It took the earth too. 18 inches deep in some places, just scraped clean like someone took a giant spoon to the neighborhood. You could see the layers of soil, different colors showing how deep that monster had dug its claws. Let's not forget the most disturbing part of all this, the debris. Or rather, the lack of it. When a regular tornado hits a house, you get chunks of wood, pieces of furniture, maybe a bathtub sitting in someone's yard 3 blocks away. We got practically nothing. Everything got shredded so completely that most pieces were smaller than confetti. The tornado basically put an entire neighborhood through the world's most violent paper shredder. Emergency responders kept asking us where the stuff went. There were 38 houses here, they'd say. Where's all the debris? We didn't have answers. Some of it probably got carried miles away, scattered across Texas like the world's most tragic treasure hunt. But most of it just pulverized into dust and blown away. I watched grown men cry looking at those empty foundations. Firefighters, police officers, paramedics who'd seen everything. They couldn't process what they were seeing. One guy kept taking off his helmet and putting it back on like he was trying to reset his vision. I've never seen anything like this, he kept saying. It's like the neighborhood got abducted. The National Weather Service people showed up with their measuring tools and clipboards, trying to make sense of what happened. They kept using words like unprecedented and extraordinary, but those words felt too clean for what we were looking at. This wasn't extraordinary, it was obscene. Nature doesn't usually erase things this completely. Walking through Double Creek Estates that day felt like walking through a graveyard where someone forgot to put up the headstones. Just these concrete rectangles marking where families used to live, where people used to laugh and fight and make dinner and tuck their kids into bed. The silence was deafening. What happened here changed how people think about tornadoes, sure. But for those of us who witnessed it, it changed how we think about everything. You can't watch an entire neighborhood disappear and still believe the world is a safe, predictable place. The families who lived through this, the ones who survived, would carry scars that went much deeper than anything you could see. I still remember the exact moment I realized my neighbors were gone, not missing. Gone. There's a difference, you know? Missing means they might come back. Gone means you're standing in front of what used to be the Morrison family's house, and there's literally nothing left except a concrete slab and some twisted metal that might have been their refrigerator. Makes sense, right? Well, nothing made sense that day. 27 people died in Jarrel. 27. That number haunted me for years because it felt both too small and impossibly huge at the same time. Too small because when you're walking through what used to be Double Creek Estates, it feels like hundreds of people should be missing. The destruction was so complete, so violent, that your brain expects massive casualties. But 27 felt huge because in a town like ours, that's not just a statistic. That's the guy who fixed your car, the woman who taught your kids piano, the family that always waved from their porch. 13 of those 27 were children. Kids who'd been home from school for maybe 3 hours before their world literally got ripped apart. I keep thinking about that timing, and honestly, it makes me sick. If the tornado had hit at noon, those kids would have been safe in their school buildings. If it had waited until evening, maybe more families would have been in their storm shelters or basements, but it didn't. It hit at the worst possible time, when kids were playing in backyards and parents were starting dinner. Then there's the part nobody really talks about in the news reports. The identification process. How do you identify someone when a 260-mile-per-hour wind has essentially erased everything? The medical examiner's office had to bring in specialists from Houston and Dallas. They set up temporary morgues because our little town facilities couldn't handle it. Some families waited days to know for sure, days of hoping, even when hope didn't make logical sense. Larry Igo survived, but barely. He was at the edge of the tornado's path, and he told me later that he watched his neighbor's house just vanish. Not collapse, not get destroyed, vanish. 1 second it was there, The next second it was gone, like some twisted magic trick. Larry said the sound was the worst part. Not the wind, but the silence afterward. No dogs barking, no kids playing, no lawnmowers running. Just dead quiet where a neighborhood used to be. But here's the weird part. Some people survived because of pure dumb luck. The Smiths weren't home because their daughter had a dentist appointment in Austin. The Johnsons had driven to Round Rock to pick up a birthday cake. Mundane, everyday errands that saved their lives while their houses got obliterated. Try explaining that to someone who lost everything. Try telling them it was just random chance that decided who lived and who died. We lost entire families. The Igos, not Larry, but another branch of the family tree. The Moerings. The Ruiz family. Generations wiped out in 30 minutes. Gabriel Hernandez was only 2 years old. Audrey Ewing was just 4. These weren't just names in the paper to us. Audrey used to wave at me from her tricycle when I walked my dog. Gabriel's mom would bring him to the grocery store and he'd giggle at everyone in the checkout line. Let's not forget the pets and livestock. Nobody keeps official counts of animals, but we're talking about dozens of dogs, cats, horses, and cattle that simply disappeared. Some bodies were found miles away. Others were never found at all. Mrs. Patterson's golden retriever turned up 3 counties over, somehow still alive but traumatized beyond belief. Most weren't that lucky. The thing that really gets to me, even now, is how the tornado didn't just kill people, it erased them. In a normal disaster, you have wreckage to sort through, belongings to recover, some physical connection to the lives that were lost. Here the wind was so powerful it turned family photos, children's toys, wedding albums, everything that made a house a home, into microscopic debris. Families had nothing left to bury with their loved ones except memories. Emergency workers from Austin and San Antonio showed up expecting a typical tornado cleanup. They kept asking us where the debris was, where the damaged houses were. They couldn't believe that 38 homes had simply ceased to exist. Some of them had never seen 5 damage before. Neither had we. The psychological toll hit our first responders hard. These were people who'd signed up to save lives, and there was nobody left to save. They had to shift from rescue mode to recovery mode within hours, and that transition broke some of them permanently. What came next would test everything we thought we knew about community, resilience, and how people respond when the unthinkable happens right in their backyard. I was working dispatch that Tuesday afternoon when the calls started flooding in. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. The calls stopped coming in first, which should have been our first clue that something catastrophic had happened. One minute we're getting reports about a tornado heading toward Double Creek Estates, and the next minute, dead silence. Complete radio blackout from that entire area. My partner Jake looked at me with this confused expression, like when your computer just stops working for no reason. "Did we lose the tower?" he asked. Tapping his headset like that would magically fix whatever was wrong. But deep down, we both knew the tower wasn't the problem. The problem was that there might not be anyone left to call us. First responders were already en route when the tornado hit, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for what they found when they arrived at Double Creek Estates. Fire Chief Ron Stewart later told me that when his crew pulled up to what should have been a neighborhood full of houses, they genuinely thought they'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Makes sense, right? You expect to see destroyed homes, maybe some debris scattered around. You don't expect to see absolutely nothing but bare concrete slabs sitting in the dirt like someone had just erased an entire community with a giant eraser. The weird part is how quickly word spread throughout the county, even without phones working properly. You know how small towns are? Information travels faster than gossip at a church potluck, especially when it's bad news. Within 30 minutes of the tornado passing, volunteer firefighters from Georgetown, Cedar Park, and Round Rock were racing toward Jarrel. Some of these guys had never seen tornado damage worse than a few missing roof shingles, and here they were about to witness something that would haunt them for decades. Emergency medical services faced challenges I wouldn't wish on anyone. Dr. Patricia Fleischer from the county medical examiner's office arrived expecting the usual tornado casualties, broken bones, cuts from flying glass, maybe some head injuries. Instead, she found herself dealing with something no medical school could have prepared her for. The extreme nature of the F-5's destruction made identifying victims nearly impossible, and I'm not going to get into the details because, frankly, some things are too heartbreaking to dwell on. Then there were the volunteers. My God, the volunteers. By evening, it looked like half of Central Texas had descended on Jarrel with shovels, work gloves, and sandwiches wrapped in aluminum foil. The Red Cross set up emergency shelters faster than I've ever seen them move, and suddenly we had donation centers sprouting up in every church, school, and community center within a 50-mile radius. People were driving up from San Antonio with trucks full of bottled water and clean clothes, asking where they could help most. But why were people so eager to help? Well, partly because Jarrell was the kind of place where everyone knew someone who knew someone affected by the tornado. The other reason, though, was pure shock. None of us had ever seen destruction this complete before. Television footage of other tornado disasters always showed damaged houses, roofs gone, walls collapsed, windows blown out. This was different. This was like the neighborhood had been professionally demolished, and then someone had forgotten to haul away the foundation slabs. Communication remained a nightmare for hours after the storm passed. Power lines were down across 3 counties, cell towers were either destroyed or overwhelmed, and even our emergency radio frequencies kept cutting in and out. Families frantically searching for missing relatives had no way to get information, and we had no reliable way to share what little we knew. The temporary morgue setup at a local funeral home became an unofficial information center, which sounds morbid but actually provided some comfort to people desperate for any kind of news. Search and rescue teams worked through the night using generator-powered floodlights, but honestly, there wasn't much left to search through. The tornado had been so thorough in its destruction that finding anything recognizable required sifting through debris fields that stretched for miles. One searcher told me they found a family photograph embedded in a tree trunk half a mile from where the house used to stand. Another team discovered car parts scattered across a pasture like someone had dropped them from an airplane. Local churches opened their doors immediately, offering everything from hot meals to counseling services. The Methodist Church became an impromptu coordination center where volunteers could sign up for different tasks, and the Baptist Church turned their fellowship hall into a temporary supply depot. Even the Catholic Church, which usually kept to itself, was handing out rosaries and comfort to anyone who needed it, regardless of their faith. What struck me most about those first few desperate hours was how the community response revealed something essential about human nature when faced with unimaginable tragedy. But as the sun began setting on that terrible Tuesday, we were all about to learn that the hardest part wasn't the immediate response, it was figuring out how to move forward when an entire piece of your world had simply vanished. I never really understood what forever meant until I saw Double Creek Estates after May 27, 1997. Well, I guess I should say until I didn't see it. Because here's the thing that still messes with my head 27 years later, they never rebuilt it. Not a single house, not even a mailbox. You'd think after all this time, someone would have come along with big dreams and bigger bulldozers, right? Some developer would have seen cheap land and started throwing up cookie-cutter homes faster than you could say tornado insurance. But no, the land just sits there, empty as my coffee cup on Monday mornings. Makes sense, right? Who wants to build where an F5 tornado literally erased an entire neighborhood? Then there's the memorial park they put up, instead. 27 trees, one for each person who died that day. I drive by sometimes, and it hits me every single time. Those trees are taller now than some of the kids who died ever got to be. There's something both beautiful and absolutely heartbreaking about that. The families chose different types of trees too. Oak trees for the strong ones, flowering trees for the kids, evergreens for those who seemed like they'd live forever. Well, I guess they do now, just not how anyone planned. But here's where things get interesting, and I mean that in the weirdest possible way. The Jarrell tornado didn't just change a small Texas town. It changed how the entire state thinks about severe weather. Before May 27th, most folks treated tornado warnings like fire drills. You know, that annoying interruption during your favorite TV show. Now, people actually listen. The National Weather Service completely overhauled their warning systems because of what happened here. They realized their old methods were about as useful as a screen door on a submarine when dealing with these slow-moving, neighborhood-eating monsters. The Jarrell tornado moved southwest, which tornadoes aren't supposed to do. It moved at 15 miles per hour, giving people more time to react, but also more time to suffer through sheer terror. And the weird part is, it got stronger as it went, not weaker. Meteorologists study Jarrell like medical students study textbooks. They've got fancy names for everything now: forward flank downdraft, and rear flank downdraft. Terms that sound impressive, but basically mean the tornado is going to mess up your entire existence. Weather prediction technology jumped about 10 years ahead because nobody wanted another Jarrel on their conscience. Let's not forget the emergency response changes either. First responders across Texas now train differently. They practice for scenarios where entire neighborhoods vanish, where normal landmarks disappear, where you can't tell a driveway from a front yard because both got sucked into the sky. Some of the firefighters who responded that day said they drove around for 20 minutes looking for houses that no longer existed. Imagine showing up to help and realizing there's literally nothing left to help with. Emergency planners nationwide used Jarrel as their worst-case scenario. Not Joplin, not Moore, not any of the other tornado disasters you've heard about, Jarrel. Because when an F5 tornado decides to park itself over your neighborhood for several minutes, moving slower than most people walk, it doesn't just destroy things. It erases them from existence. The survivors, and there weren't many in the direct path, they carry stories that sound like science fiction. Cars twisted into unrecognizable metal sculptures, family photos turned into confetti scattered across 3 counties, wedding rings that survived but the houses they lived in didn't leave behind so much as a splinter. You want to know what really gets me, though? The kids who were in school that day, the ones who came home to find their neighborhoods gone, they're adults now. Some of them became meteorologists, emergency responders, even storm chasers. They turned their trauma into purpose. Others moved as far away from Texas as possible and never looked back. Can't say I blame them. But the legacy isn't just about better warning systems or memorial parks or career changes. It's about how quickly everything you think is permanent can just disappear. Those families thought they'd found their forever homes in Double Creek Estates. They had morning routines, favorite grocery stores, kids with best friends 3 houses down. Normal Tuesday afternoon lives. The thing about Jarrel is that it's a reminder living in the middle of Texas, quietly growing its memorial trees. Other tornado-prone towns look at those empty lots and think about their own neighborhoods differently now. They remember that concrete foundations and steel frames are just suggestions when nature decides to show off. And speaking of nature showing off, what happened in Jarrel wasn't some freak accident that could never happen again. The atmospheric conditions that created that monster tornado, they happen more often than anyone wants to admit, setting the stage for disasters that could make even Jarrel look like a warm-up act.